There's no such thing as really a perfectly clean test in marketing. This isn't science, but it's basically just trying to set yourself up to get statistical significance as quickly as possible so that you can make the right decisions instead of just kind of having paralysis by analysis, not to use too many buzzwords.
Hello and welcome to the DTC podcast. Today, hot seatable Margaret Fortner from Hydrant, which is drinkhydrant.com. Margaret signed up for the newsletter and volunteered to let us take a look at their funnel. And we very quickly realized that Margaret and Hydrant have put some amazing next level work to dial up brand, their website, their landing pages, and their whole customer experience up to 11. So today we're grilling Margaret on some of her growth strategies, as well as Hydrant's advanced custom web design, as well as how to help teams to test many things, performance-driven branding, and lots more. But before I go any further, I wanted to let you know that all these insights will be perfectly distilled right down into little nuggets to use in the D2C newsletter at direct to consumer. We don't just aim to curate things or, just keep up with the D2C world, which we do that as well. But we also aim to give you tactical instructional advice that you can just read and act on to see growth right away. Step-by-step instructions about the big issues that are facing you as someone trying to see brands today. So go to consumer.co, sign up for our newsletter. And before I go any further, let's introduce our panel. We have, of course, Kyle Hitchcock's co-founder of Pilot House and DTC CROOG, as Kate Boyle, the man behind the D2C news. So thanks for everyone for coming today. How are you doing, Margaret?
I am doing great. Apparently there's going to be a lot of wind outside soon, so hopefully that does not get picked up. But other than that, it's beautiful sunny Thursday, and things are going great at Hydrant.
It looks great where you are. You're in New York. It looks very bright.
Yes. Yeah, I've got some big windows over here, so mood lighting, I guess.
It's perfect.
But yeah, I'm in New York.
Nice. And how are the Kyles feeling?
I'm great. Happy to be here. Excited to talk about Hydrant and what you guys have built. It's pretty impressive.
I'm actually nervous on this one.
Yeah, it was interesting. To give a little background, we actually did like a full funnel review where we had a full team kind of go over Hydrants right from their ads all through their really interesting landing pages. We talked about their brand, gave some feedback, and this is our actual first time talking about that. We won't go into super in depth on that stuff. We'll get to it for sure. But first, Margaret, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your personal story, see how that sort of dovetailed in with Hydrant.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually spent most of my time prior to Hydrant on the agency side of things. So performance marketing, growth marketing agencies. I started in paid search, and I'm still at heart a search engine marketer, which is funny since most of what I do nowadays in terms of acquisition marketing is Facebook. But went across a number of agencies, and I found that, as I moved through agencies and moved up in roles, I was getting increasingly involved with the creative side of things, which I think is the story for a lot of growth marketers nowadays. As you're investing on Facebook, it's really important to have strong performance creative. That's what's going to drive a lot of your results at a certain scale level. Personally, I've always been interested in, health and fitness. I've been a runner most of my life. So when I discovered Hydrant, I just thought it was kind of a great intersection of, the opportunity to help build an early stage brand and set up the whole growth team and build everything out from there, as well as just, working with a great product that falls right into kind of the fitness and wellness space. So good intersection of personal interests and professional background, which is always kind of the ideal.
Very cool. KG, you had a question about the background a bit.
Yeah. So in doing a little bit of research on you, I noticed that you spent some time working at the MLB, with Major League Baseball, which is pretty cool. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to any takeaways that you had from that experience, or what that was like. I'm just kind of fascinated.
Yeah, back in those days, my dream was ultimately to be the commissioner of the NFL. So I thought that MLB was a natural step there. Unfortunately, Roger Goodell has signed many extended contracts, so I had to give up on that dream. But I was on the performance marketing team at MLB. Our focus was we were essentially the in-house agency for all the clubs. So back a while ago, all of the MLB clubs put in a certain amount of money to fund MLB Advanced Media, which is essentially the in-house creative and performance marketing agency for Major League Baseball teams to be able to sell tickets. It was a really interesting time to be there. I think it was 2017, 2016. Because I think that was right at the point where baseball kind of viewership was starting to fall a little bit, and tickets were not selling themselves as directly anymore. So we had to actually put effort into it, whereas it used to just be put a little bit of money behind brand search and the tickets will sell themselves. So we got to do a lot of testing because players were starting to be willing to kind of put their personalities forwards. Whereas in baseball, traditionally, it's been very team oriented, especially when you compare to a sport like the NBA. So we were able to start doing some interesting things with, the stars that were coming out, your Aaron Judges, Mike Trouts, though Mike Trout didn't really want to be featured that much. But it was a great opportunity to work on such a legacy brand and put some marketing firepower behind it, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, it's awesome. Just one more follow up to that. And how much does it cost to get someone to see one of your ads and then into a stadium? Is that something you'd be able to give us a little taste of?
It would probably be a bit of an outdated taste, and it really depends on the team also. So I worked on 11 of the teams at one point. So I was, just to take the two opposite ends of the spectrum, I was working on the Cubs 2 years after they won the World Series, and I was working on the Giants, who at that point in time were one of the worst teams in baseball. So, the Cubs, you're talking about like $8 CPA, basically, super easy. They also tended to have larger budgets behind them. But then you're thinking about the Giants, you got to do a little extra work. And I think it was also just the different channels that you utilized really came into play. And there was a much more full funnel marketing approach needed with the Giants. We did some really interesting testing in terms of sequential advertising, leveraging different pieces of a long form documentary that they had used. So it was more expensive, but sometimes that's more fun and kind of a better learning experience, especially when you're early in your career.
That's really neat. Sequential advertising is something that I've always had as like an ideal that would work really well in principle. You'd have to do all these exclusions to make sure people are kind of following along and all. It's really interesting concept and cool to explore. I think the main thing that I sort of sense in the notes that you provided us, what I see in Hydrant in terms of the amount of tests that you have running, and the amount that you seem willing to let data really just tell the story of your growth. And so it'd be interesting just to hear you talk a little bit about your mindset with Hydrant when it comes to, testing multiple different things in your whole marketing funnel.
Yeah, I think our approach is really, you hit the nail on the head, letting data kind of drive everything that we do. So my job in some degree is to make sure that our data is as cleanly structured and as aggregated as possible, so that when we are running, a ton of tests at once, it's not impossible to make sense of what's going on. So that comes down to things like how we name our ads, how we're structuring landing pages. And I spend a lot of time on kind of our reporting suite and making sure that everything is flowing in a manner that is easily digestible, so we can roll everything up across things like tagging every ad that's a video as a video, tagging every ad that has a blue background as having a blue background. So then I can compare across, let's say, 1,000 ads that are running at once. The 75 that had blue background outperformed the 33 that had a red background and the 14 that had a pink background and everything like that. So I think it really comes down to structuring your campaign and general marketing setup as cleanly as possible, so that you can really aggregate and get a strong read out of it, because there's no such thing as really a perfectly clean test in marketing. This isn't science, but it's basically just trying to set yourself up to get statistical significance as quickly as possible, so that you can make the right decisions instead of just kind of having paralysis by analysis, not to use too many buzzwords.
Nice.
Really interesting, like the analytics side. So do you find that you're naturally drawn to analytics? And then like, how does that work from like managing your team? Because like that's a really good skill set, especially when you're trying to scale. Because what happens in direct response or performance marketing or any marketing is the chaos, right?
Yeah, so sure. So I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that I started in paid search, and success in paid search, it really comes down to being comfortable with numbers and being good with numbers. And I, I didn't come into marketing with any sort of a marketing background. My degree is in poli-sci and economics, so not marketing in any way, shape, or form. And I think one of the things that I realized I needed to learn quickly early on was Excel skills, which sounds weird since I started this off by talking about how important learning creative is. But I think I am naturally, interested in numbers and analytics, and I think building a strong growth team, if I'm thinking about kind of the candidates that I would get on early, if you're building out a growth team, whether in an agency or in-house, you need at least one or two people who are really comfortable with numbers there. And I think one thing I've been really passionate about with analytics is automation. I've interviewed a lot of candidates in a lot of different roles, and you have people who are spending 90% of their day just copying and pasting numbers, exporting numbers from Facebook Ads Manager, Google Ads Manager, all of those sorts of things. So anytime you can find a tool, whether it's through going the whole way to a data warehouse and setting up anything like that, or utilizing any of the great like Google Sheets hook-ins that are available, I think automation to power someone with an analytics skill set is extremely crucial.
Totally. And putting those bumpers in place, like just those numbers, like
Yeah.
here's what you're actually working towards, because everything changes every day and people need to be creative in how they're accomplishing their goals, right?
Exactly.
The poli-sci economics thing actually makes perfect sense for a marketing like ambassador or person, because like poli-sci, that's just the ultimate psychology game.
Yeah, it's true. I do think some of my favorite classes were in game theory, which really is a huge psychology game. I spent a whole semester studying the Cuban Missile Crisis through the lens of game theory. Our textbook was this like ancient book from the 80s, but it was just extremely fascinating. Constant game of chicken.
That's super cool. There's a documentary. I love talking about this BBC documentary, and Adam Curtis, he did it. It's called The Trap, and it's the 4-hour documentary. He's done like 8 amazing 4-hour documentaries, but it's all on how game theory has sort of come to define a lot of the different relationships and ethics. Global, which is a super interesting topic.
It's awesome. I'm gonna have to check it out.
Yeah, we'll put a link in the show notes.
Margaret, you mentioned you're a search engine marketer at heart, and it's like many D2C brands, they do shy away from search. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about why that is, and whether or not you think maybe they're missing an opportunity by not using or leveraging search.
Oh, there's a simple one-word explanation. Amazon. Amazon really creates a lot of problems, I think, for a lot of brands, e-commerce brands in particular. I think more service-oriented brands, and if you want to think about some of the bigger players nowadays, if we're thinking about like streaming brands, Disney Plus, anything like that, I think that they feel a little more comfortable going into search. But when we're thinking about e-commerce brands, the majority of investment that I tend to see is in brand search and in shopping. Non-brand is just really harder to have success in. It requires a lot of time and effort up front. And I think, especially when you're thinking about a lot of smaller D2C brands, they just don't have that much time. You have people who are performing 5 different roles at once. I do think it is an opportunity that a lot of brands are missing out on, because yes, it's a lot of work up front, but once the engine really starts rolling, not only are you having an incremental acquisition channel that's kind of outside of the traditional Facebook realm, and obviously everyone's trying to reduce their reliance on Facebook nowadays, but you also just get such great consumer insights when you're looking at things in the search queries, and you can use that to drive your product development roadmap. You can use it to identify early issues in customer experience. Basically, your customers and potential customers are telling you secrets within the search queries, and a lot of brands aren't even bothering to look at them or set up the right keywords and everything so that they can catch that sort of information. I mean, I even think of search as kind of a low-cost audience research tool more than anything else, even if you're not using it to directly convert customers.
That's super interesting and super insightful for our audience as well. Thank you. I wanted to ask, I think, your what we see in terms of your landing pages, your sales funnels, the number of ads that you are testing at any given time. Can you talk a little bit about that, sort of like what that testing stack looks like? How many tests are you sort of running at any given time? And how are you just making sure that you're getting the most usable data from each of those tests when you have so many different tests going on?
A lot of spreadsheets and Google Sheets. And I think anytime we launch a test, something that we feel really strongly about is ensuring that we've identified at least our primary and secondary KPIs, possibly even a tertiary KPI, and what our target is for whatever we're testing and what that benchmark is. Because if you just kind of go into a test and you're like, oh, I'm going to test this, you can get 2 weeks later and you have a lot of data, but you don't even know how to go about kind of interpreting that data. So if you're thinking about ad testing, let's say you're going to run two different videos against each other, you have to think through it, like what am I trying to figure out primarily with these ads? Am I looking for what's going to have the better click-through rate? Am I looking for what's going to have the better view-through rate? Am I looking for what's going to have the better ROAS? I mean, you get so much information with growth and growth marketing nowadays that it can be a little overwhelming. So I think having that starting point of always being reliance on a primary and a secondary KPI and having a specific target is extremely useful and extremely crucial. And honestly, just writing it down is big, and setting a benchmark when we're going to check on that test and try to determine whether we consider that test a win, a loss, for lack of a better term, or something that needs to be continued, because or else you can just kind of have tests running in perpetuity and not ultimately have an outcome.
I don't know if you read in our last piece, I guess it was, or maybe the piece before, we wrote about the gold coin testing strategy, or this idea of testing individual, basically like getting data on individual aspects of your funnel ahead of time, and then sort of like forging them together in stack of like things that all work together. Have you experimented with that? Like just walk through like what a test looks like for you guys. I know for us, in terms of our audience, there's still a huge percentage of our audience who aren't even using pre-sales, right? They're not using that same sort of like whole funnel experience. A lot of them are driving to product pages or to home pages or things like that. So just walk to be what on a given week, what you might be testing.
And just before, I just want to give props to Stu. He's a Pilot House staff member. This is a concept that he's brought to the team. So gold coin.
Sure. I think a lot of it really comes down to, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but trying to isolate a single variable as much as you can. So the testing approach is really going to depend a lot on kind of the test that we ran before. So let's take an example. Let's say we were running running 3 video assets against each other last week, and we came out of that with a clear idea of which asset was, the best performer. Let's say it was asset A. So then the next step is going to be, okay, we have a couple things we can test here. We can test, 3 different pieces of copy all against asset A, or we can test 3 different landing pages all against asset A, or we can test a slight variation edit on asset A. Like maybe we put the end frame at the beginning, or we test a different, overlay type or anything like that. So I think it's really trying not to have too many moving pieces at once. And as you identify winners, stacking those winners on top of each other, and just trying to build the best, stack of winners over time, for lack of a better term. So yeah, I think that's really what it comes down to. This is a pretty concrete example of exactly that. We got, 4 new assets a couple of weeks ago. We had 2 that came out as a very clear winner. As everyone starts to see, you get a certain degree of ad fatigue after, a number of impressions on Facebook. So then what we did was say, okay, let's look at what landing pages have the best conversion rate. And let's run a test with, 4 or 5 of these different landing pages against the same asset, and see if we can take the volume we were getting from that asset and essentially expand the volume against those landing pages that theoretically have the, higher conversion rate, and if that conversion rate is ultimately scalable. So it's taking your winners, isolating the variable as much as possible, and just kind of having it be a iterative flywheel of learning.
It's awesome. And you guys, there are obviously a lot of moving parts, no matter how you slice it. I'm curious about how a brand could go about building, a small but mighty team that that can manage all these moving parts and optimize campaigns.
Yeah, so going back to what I said earlier, definitely having at least one or two people who are very comfortable with the data and analytics side of things. And beyond the people that you're building, making sure you're giving them the right tech stack and the tools that they need to succeed. There are obviously the enterprise level options if you want to think about, data warehousing, the ETLs that are utilized to set up those data warehouses, whether you're thinking about like a Fivetran, a Stitch, anything like that, and then those feeding into business intelligence tools like Tableau and Looker. But there's also the free version of doing it. You can utilize visualization software like Google Data Studio. I love Google Data Studio so much. It's definitely a bit of a pain to learn, but for a free tool, you get a lot of horsepower out of it. And then you can utilize tools like Supermetrics is something that I've used a lot. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but it hooks into a ton of different APIs, feeds into Google Sheets. You don't even need to necessarily take the step of hooking into Data Studio if you're just feeding all that good information into utilizing Supermetrics and just feeding it into Sheets. But I think giving the team those tools allows the team to spend their time thinking instead of just copying and pasting and doing all this sort of reporting thing. So when you are working with a small team, you want to empower them to be as impactful as humanly possible. So you've got your data person, whether their whole focus is on data or on something else, you just want to make sure you have that in there. Our e-commerce manager was actually hired before I was, and I totally support that decision because if you don't have a strong functional site, there's really no point in trying to drive a ton of growth to it. You can have a good product, but if no one can buy that product effectively, or they have such a hard time buying that product, then there's really no point. So making sure you have a strong team that focuses on conversion rate optimization, landing page testing, cross-sells and upsells, all the different sorts of nice features that if you're a brand that has a subscription element like us, are good for people who are continuously returning the site. And then I think the last key piece, if you want to keep it a relatively small team, is someone to manage acquisition campaigns. So, Facebook, Google, all that good sort of stuff. If that person can be the same person who's comfortable with data, even better, because they'll be doing all the sort of testing and analyses, and it makes it a shorter process to go from gathering the data to doing the analytics and figuring out what the next iteration of that test should be. But that's really how I would think about structuring it. Really, the next stage of that is then thinking about kind of your creative team, whether it's the creative team that's if it's directly housed under growth, or if it's kind of shared resources between like a brand team and a growth team. But there's a certain point, especially when you're thinking about paid social, where you're not going to scale effectively much further until you have a good creative engine going.
Very cool. Yeah, I think what I'm impressed, with what you guys have been able to do at Hydrant is you've really combined, a really amazing creative abilities and ability and willingness to go down all sorts of different avenues and sort of test them all to see what really works in this idea of performance branding. I wanted to ask, like, how has the growth gone with Hydrant? Like, you seem to be doing all the right away by this custom Shopify build you guys have done. The product looks amazing. I'm into the idea of the product. How has the growth gone?
And also, should we also maybe just let folks know what Hydrant is?
Yeah, that's
yes.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I can give a description. So Hydrant falls into a category that is technically known as oral rehydration solutions. It's a technical term for essentially an electrolyte drink mix powder. You pour it into water. It hydrates you more quickly and more effectively. It also tastes great. We make our product with real fruit juice powder. So there's another benefit there. The actual sugar that's within the product scientifically works, and I'm not even going to try to say the term because our co-founder, John, the Oxford scientist, would probably make fun of me for saying it wrong, but essentially having some sugar in there activates a pump within your system and actually helps you absorb the water more quickly than if you think about other brands that are using artificial sweeteners. There's an actual functional component to why we include sugar in our product. It's not just, a taste thing. So that is Hydrant. In terms of how growth is going, things are great. I think, so starting a little farther back, the brand was founded really in about late 2018, saw some strong growth in 2019, released our second functional line, our Hydrant Plus Caffeine, in September of 2019. This all led up to our Series A round of funding announcement in May of this year. And that's really helped us to kind of, sustain, build out the right team and the tools that we need to drive growth. And I think right now, people are really kind of trying to drive healthy, effective, wellness routines. A lot of people are working out from home, everything like that. So people are turning a lot to products like Hydrant that, help them stay hydrated, and so many positive benefits to hydration, from focus to increased energy, even increased mood. So yeah, I'm happy with how things are going. We released 3 new flavors this summer. They all sold out very quickly. Nice. And just got some back in stock, but things have been good.
And is it mostly being driven by ads? Is it like I guess you're a digitally native brand, right? You're not, are you selling also in retail stores?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are primarily a direct-to-consumer brand. We are also on Amazon, and we are in retail in the Northeast. So we're in Whole Foods in Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. We may or may not have some national retail announcements coming in the near future, but I think retail is an area that we see as a huge opportunity, and I think also kind of a differentiating factor versus other brands within the space. So, we made the decision to grow direct to consumer first, and there are so many benefits of doing that from the standpoint of what you learn about your customers, I would say is really a big piece of it. Versus when someone comes in through retail, let's say through Walmart or comes in through Amazon, ultimately Walmart and Amazon have all the information about your customers and you can't really learn and act from it. Whereas if you grow direct to consumer first, you're kind of starting a couple steps ahead just by knowing what your customers are interested in, how they're responding, and you can test and learn a lot more rapidly than if you're reliant for most of your revenue coming from brick and mortar stores that aren't really apt to share their information.
That's amazing. Congrats on getting, digital first and going to retail. That's a common thing that's happening. Obviously, historically, it's the other way around, but it's really interesting from like a marketplace or an ecosystem. There's these brands that are trying to do DR, and then there's these DR brands that are trying to go retail. So it's good, like the next 2-3 years are going to be really fascinating, kind of how that all develops in terms of acquisitions and rollouts and whatnot. You talked about, we're talking about channels. Can you talk a little bit about like the specifics, and you don't have to be too specific, but just your subscription business, like what's a breakdown of a good customer for you? I see that you have trial stuff going, there's risk with that. I see that you have straight sales stuff going. Can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah, so we have both our one-time purchase side of the business and our subscription side of the business. Subscription, there's obviously a really positive revenue flywheel associated, and there's kind of like compounding revenue throughout the year as long as you have a strong retention table, and that's where a lot of things like our customer experience team and our email advertising comes into play. But as I'm sure is the case with a lot of subscription brands, it's a lot easier to acquire someone as a one-time purchaser first and then ultimately convert them over to the subscription side of things. So subscription is a strong performer for us for sure. I can't get into the specific numbers, but it's definitely a strong part of our business. We also like how our one-time purchase side of the business is performing, but it's the combination of bringing in people on one-time purchase and, converting them over to subscription. But there's also a psychological component of subscription versus one-time purchase. Some people just aren't ever going to want to subscribe to something, even though we make it very easy to cancel if you want to. You can, delay your subscription. You can change flavors really easily. But some people are just fundamentally opposed to commitment, for lack of a better term. So we don't want to try and force everyone into subscription if they're not ultimately gonna give in. So that's where we think about creating the best experience for consistent one-time purchasers as well. We just launched a new bundle builder on site where you can create your own custom bundle, and there are discount benefits to that for repeat purchasers. So we want all people are welcome to Hydrant, whether they're subscribers or perpetual one-time buyers ultimately.
That's amazing. And can you talk a little bit about how you're taking one-time consumers and moving them into a subscription?
Yeah, I think a lot of that has really been our email testing. We have a great email team that we work with. So we're trying to do as much as we can to identify subscription behavior versus non-subscriber behavior. And having those people coming in direct to consumer helps with that. We can look at the characteristics of people coming in who have been 4-month plus subscribers, and try to find people similar to them as much as we can tell. But a lot of it really comes down to, I would say, flow automation, and then also kind of occasional testing, first month off subscription offers to people who have purchased X amount of times in a one-time purchase standpoint. We also do have a couple channels where we invest specifically through the lens of trying to acquire people as subscribers. So we have had some success with specific channels to acquire people upfront as subscribers. But I think for the most part, turning people from OTP to subscription has been an email exercise. And I mean, the great thing about email is it's free or pretty close to free. So you can do a lot of crazy stuff testing there without having the potential downside you can have on Facebook of having to invest a lot of money in something that's not ultimately going to be effective.
And with the segmentation, you can just make sure that you really know where you're getting the data from. You can, with the right kind of people, you can almost guarantee response as well.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that we were talking about on the funnel review that we did was just sort of some of the stuff around that sort of core attribution level. Like how are you, what are you using basically to ensure the sort of fidelity of your data down to, to ad, and making sure that you're sort of always keeping track of every aspect of that funnel? Is that all done in analytics, or are you just using the Facebook interface for that?
It's a mix of a couple sources. I'll call it kind of our own in-house custom attribution setup, kind of blended across a number of sources between advertising and things like Shopify and Google Analytics. I can't get too deeply into it, but it's kind of a blend that's semi-automated, semi-manual, but we feel comfortable in terms of how things. I think one of the worst things you can do with attribution is set up a system where there's no direct relationship between the information that your marketers have to make decisions on a day-to-day basis and the information in your attribution model. So you don't want to have it be that, Facebook will see your CPA go down by $10, but in the attribution model, it goes up by $5. So you want to make sure at the very least that your internal attribution source tracks very directionally with your primary acquisition channels. And we've been able to find that that's the case. So, I think we feel that it's a good midpoint between just totally trusting what Facebook has to say and what the marketing platforms have to say, because you should never do that. But it also doesn't hamstring our ability to make real-time decisions and kind of double down on opportunities.
Just before we wrap up, Margaret, I like to think that younger up-and-coming growth marketers listen to this podcast, and I'm curious if you were, if you're getting started today, where would you recommend that those up and coming growth marketers go to get started, and why?
That's a great question. I think this is a really broad answer, but YouTube just has so many great resources, and maybe I'm I am kind of a visual learner, and I like to, see things being done in a way that I can easily replicate to learn for myself. But I think just getting out there and searching things on YouTube, like Facebook ads 101, like Google ads 101, everything like that. The second piece I would say is really getting your analytical skills and kind of like data related skills down. I don't anticipate data and analytics going away as a key part of a growth marketer's skill set. If anything, I would say you see more and more technically oriented people getting into marketing than they previously were. So, learning through things like YouTube, working on your data and analytical skill set, and then just reaching out to, other growth people on LinkedIn. We all have, and any other resources, we all have strong opinions about growth. And I think we also have differing opinions about, growth and the right way to do things. And none of them are really wrong. So to me, I always want to learn and synthesize information from as many people as possible. So I think anyone who's become successful in growth should be and probably is willing to talk about how they've been successful. So I think do your own research, get good at Excel, and don't be afraid to reach out to people.
Nice. I thought you were just going to say Google. I thought you were just going to go back to Google. Just start with Google, because I think there is something to that. You explained that earlier in the program, just really where, how that gives you a really great for so much research about everything that you're doing. But great response anyway. I wanted to ask the final question. This is something we ask in like most of our podcasts, and it sort of reveals a little bit, I think. So say the US government gives you a $50K grant that you don't have to pay back. What part of your business do you put that into right now in order to see, the best return? Where would you put that?
It's a great question. I would either give it to our product team for some more kind of, product development roadmap acceleration, or I would invest it in kind of our data stack. There's, we've automated a lot of things. I think there's more that we can do that would empower our team to be even more strategic and impactful on a day-to-day basis. So one of those, depending on the day, kind of depending on how much time I've been spending in our dashboards. So either upgrading our data stack or ensuring that our product team is set up for the best success to kind of accelerate where we're planning on taking things.
Nice. Great answers. Thank you very much for coming on the D2C podcast today. I think there's just an absolute treasure trove of information in here. I can't wait to see how Hydrant continues to grow, and let's totally stay in touch. We're super happy to have you as part of this this network, and I think we've got lots we could learn, and I think lots we could share too, even further from this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
This has been an awesome opportunity to learn from Margaret Fortner. Margaret, I guess you're still here. What's a way if people want to connect with another D2C marketer? What's the best way to do that? Are you on Twitter?
I'm not on Twitter. I am on LinkedIn. That's probably my primary social network. So feel free to.
Yeah, don't bug me. Pretty much, I'm in stealth growth mode here. Don't bug me. But anyways. Thanks, everyone. Go to directtoconsumer.co to subscribe and keep your ears peeled. We're going to be launching some really cool things soon. So can't wait to tell you more about it. Cheers, everyone.